The US president is unlikely to agree to extend the evacuation from Afghanistan, giving British and American forces just days to complete their work. President Biden is expected to tell Boris Johnson and other G7 leaders today that it would be too risky to remain in the country after the August 31st deadline.
Morning, Britain.
I think it's worth the G7 trying, but in the MOD we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best.
Inside Afghanistan, the refugee crisis. There are orphans going hungry and thousands of children homeless. This lunchtime, we'll have the latest from Kabul and from Westminster and Washington, where the spotlight returns to the president. Also on the programme.
And here they come from Great Britain, 219 of them.
Britain's Paralympians prepare to compete in Japan. Missing milkshakes in McDonald's, why the chain doesn't have any anywhere in Britain. And why Birmingham's Mission Impossible, one the city chose to accept, was to serve up curry to Tom Cruise.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Chris Shipp.
Good afternoon. The extension to the timetable to evacuate people from Afghanistan seems unlikely to be granted by US President Joe Biden when he talks to other Western nations today. Boris Johnson and other European leaders have been pressing for more time, but with the Americans in charge of security at Kabul airport and the situation becoming more and more dangerous, there is little chance of it happening. Under its agreement with the Taliban, the US must leave Afghanistan, including the airport, by the 31st of August. The UK Defence Secretary said today that the US is unlikely to extend that deadline. It will be decided during a crisis G7 summit taking place remotely this afternoon. The Taliban have warned of consequences if foreign forces stay in the country beyond their red line date. Our political reporter Shihab Khan has the latest developments.
For many, it is a race against time to get on an evacuation flight out of Kabul. People here are desperate in their quest for freedom, as many fear for their lives, concerned about the consequences of living under the new regime. Daniel lives in Ipswich. His father was a police officer in Afghanistan. He foiled a bomb plot, but now the man who was convicted has been released by the Taliban, and he fears for his father's life.
The Taliban and that man is a very dangerous problem for him at the moment. What I want from the government of England, that just save my family, nothing else. I don't want anything else, just save my family.
The current deadline for when US troops are set to withdraw, taking the protection they provide Kabul airport with them, is the 31st of August, potentially leaving just a few days for evacuation flights to continue. Later today at the G7 talks, the Prime Minister will urge Joe Biden to extend that date. But how likely is that to happen?
I think it's a low probability that it will be extended. I look at the public comments by President Biden. I look at the interviews given by the Taliban yesterday. I think it's worth the G7 trying. But in the MOD, we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best.
The Taliban have said any extension would be a violation, but how they would respond remains unclear. There are mounting concerns, however, about their management of the country. Today at the United Nations, their human rights chief reported there had been serious violations of international law in Afghanistan.
They include, among others, summary executions of civilians and all the combat members of the Afghan National Security Forces. Restrictions on the right of women, including the right to move around freely and girls' right to attend school. Recruitment of child soldiers and repression of peaceful protests and expression of dissent.
That's why the urgency to get people out is so high. This Conservative backbencher served in Afghanistan. He is working to try and save people, including his own interpreter.
I was blessed by having people of integrity and courage, and who did not quit, didn't go on holiday when the going got tough, didn't disappear at moments of extreme pressure. They were there, and I think we owe them a duty of care.
When the G7 sits to talk later today, there's a hope that decisions can be reached by the world's most powerful nations to try and help the people in Afghanistan as much as possible. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
Right, let's go to Kabul now, and CNN senior international correspondent Sam Kiley is there and sent us this update a few moments ago.
Well, the number of people down from when I was on the ground on the flight line yesterday afternoon was 10,500. There's now 4,500 people waiting to get out. That's less than the number of US troops at 5,800 here at Kabul airport. There's also 1,000 British and numerous others from the wider coalition. A lot of them, of course, special forces, all trying to get their particular people out that they've had a relationship with. But this is all being conducted in a period of extreme tension. At about 5 o'clock this morning, for about 45 minutes or longer, just off to the west here, there was a substantial firefight. We don't know who this was between. There is also now large crowds coalescing around the Serena Hotel downtown in Kabul. This is because the Qatari embassy there, it has emerged, has been helping small numbers of people, even the ambassador himself, driving people to the airport to help with the evacuation. And on top of that, the Taliban have now told CNN on the ground inside Kabul that they are now actively hunting for ISIS, because they have caught, they claim, 4 ISIS or alleged ISIS operators filming possible targets on the streets of Kabul. But as we speak, aircraft are still taking off and landing, trying to clear the decks of these 4,500 people. But at the moment, very few more people are coming in. And the fear must be that at some stage, particularly if the extension is not made, the US operation will start to withdraw into itself to prepare for its own withdrawal, and those gates may never open formally for the large numbers that have been evacuated so far. The figure now must be well over 40,000, but there are many more thousands on the outskirts of the gate. Local reports of estimates here on the airfield put those close to the gate about 9,000.
Sam Kiley reporting from Kabul. Now, it is not only the plight of those who want to leave the country which is creating fears of what may unfold. The rapid advance of the Taliban across Afghanistan forced many people to flee their homes and become refugees in their own country. This is Aisha, a young Afghan girl orphaned by the crisis. She is one of 72,000 refugee children in Kabul, forced to sleep in makeshift camps or on the streets. Many families came to the capital because they thought they would be safe there. But since the Taliban seized control, the situation has grown increasingly desperate. Despite the crowds at the airport, the reality for most people is that there is no way out. And leading aid agencies have warned there is currently no way to get supplies in to Afghanistan. Joining me now is Marianne Horn from the Red Cross. Marianne, look, the focus, as you all well know, has been on the airport and the crowds around the airport. But actually, in many ways, it's ignoring the desperate plight of all the people in the rest of Afghanistan, in the provinces that your organisation has been working.
Absolutely. And a vast majority of those who are most in need of assistance are really people who have remained in their towns, in their villages, or have fled to the closest, towns that they can get to. There are 18 million people in need of humanitarian assistance across Afghanistan. 11 million, that's a third of Afghanistan's population, is confronted with food insecurity now, so face hunger. And this is at a time only 2% of the population is vaccinated against the pandemic. So really what we are saying is that there is a much wider humanitarian picture out there unfolding, caused by a very severe drought, followed by flash flooding, compounding effects of COVID on many of the livelihoods and the income of people, and also a very large increase in the fighting in some of Afghanistan's provinces.
Now, you've worked yourself in Afghanistan, and you know, as we do, geographically it's landlocked. People can't get out because the borders are controlled by the Taliban as well. I mean, the situation is pretty desperate. And I just wonder how you're still able to work in this situation, given that the control of the country has changed in the last sort of 8 or 9 days and is now controlled by the Taliban.
Yes, it's a fast-moving situation, and really it's very fluid at the moment. But the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, that is the Afghan Red Crescent and the International Committee of the Red Cross on the ground, are operational. And they have been in the 34 provinces of Afghanistan over the past few days. And what's important really to remember is that this is an organization, the Afghan Red Crescent and the International Committee of the Red Cross, who have been in Afghanistan for 30 years and who will continue to provide services, including to some of the most remote areas of the country, whoever is in power.
Given that the Taliban are now in control, how do you still get supplies into the country? You have to clearly do it with their, with their authority.
So this is the network that is established in country is one, again, that has been there for 30 years, no matter who has been in power. The Red Crescent runs, for example, the largest network of health clinics across the country, including in some of the most remote areas. And really the organization, both International Committee of the Red Cross and the Afghan Red Crescent, focus on the needs of the people in these various places where they deliver assistance, and will continue to do so. There's great experience there as humanitarians in navigating the complexities of delivering in such a context, and really being there with partners on the ground who are part of the community. This is not an organization that is parachuted in and that is seen as an outsider. The way the assistance is delivered is really through the local networks, and hence across the country there is a presence, and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement as a whole is operational. For example, with in Kandahar, still
Marianne.
many injured from the recent fighting being treated by the ICRC.
Marianne, your organisation is doing great work, and we appreciate your time talking to us this lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get analysis now of this developing story. We're in Washington shortly with our global security editor, Rohit. Let's first go to our political reporter, Shihab, who's in Westminster. Shihab, the British government are preparing for an August 31st pullout. That seems to be the clear message today.
Absolutely, and it's something that will be discussed today when the G7, which is 7 of the world's most powerful leaders sitting down together, they'll be talking about that. The Prime Minister will be chairing that discussion. He actually had a phone call with the US President Joe Biden last night, in which it was mentioned there as well, and no agreement was reached. They'll be pushing the US to stay beyond the 31st of August because, as I mentioned in my report, the US provide the security for the airport, and they need that security there to do evacuation flights. Now, the Defence Secretary made it quite clear they think the probability of that is quite low, so we'll have to wait and see whether the pressure of that conversation with G7 leaders budges things ever so slightly. But there'll be other things on the agenda as well. They're going to be talking about aid, humanitarian aid, trying to get pledges across those 7 nations, setting targets for refugees, and also talking about the best way to deal with the Taliban. Now, sources inside Number 10 are telling me the key thing here, the strategy going into this, is unity. It's making sure that all 7 nations are on the same page when dealing with the Taliban, because given the gravity of the situation, the best way to do this is to do this together, to work together and deal with this crisis.
OK, thank you. And to Washington now. And Rohit, the mood music in this side of the Atlantic is that the extension won't happen. What's the music there?
Well, at this virtual G7 meeting, Chris, there's really only one voice that matters. That's that of President Joe Biden, and we're expecting some clarity from him later today. For logistical reasons, really, because if they are to extend the deadline, well, for those logistics, the military need to know that today, perhaps tomorrow, and so we will expect to get some sort of clarity on whether that's going to happen later this afternoon. Most significant today may well be that the CIA director has flown to Kabul to meet with the leader of the Taliban, a man who was once detained with the help of CIA intelligence. That might suggest that the Americans are looking for a way to this extension. It may too suggest that the Taliban is also seeking concessions. But remember one thing at this G7 virtual summit. These leaders met for real 2 months ago. There was a 25-page communique, and Afghanistan was mentioned twice back then. It really was an afterthought. It's now the dominant international issue.
Indeed so. Rohit in Washington, Shihab in Westminster, thank you both. Right, some of the day's other stories now, and police are trying to identify a woman who was found dead in a lake in Oxfordshire. CCTV pictures have been released in the hope that someone who knows her will come forward. It's been over a week since her body was found and police still haven't been able to identify her. E.ON and Scottish Power have confirmed they'll be increasing energy prices for people on their standard tariffs by £139 a year. It's after the industry regulator announced they'd be raising their energy price cap from October. Now, just as with the Olympics before it, the Paralympics opening ceremony today is taking place in a stadium without any crowds. With soaring rates of coronavirus in Japan, a situation worse now than it was at the start of the Olympic Games, more than 4,000 athletes will compete in 22 different sports, as Lucy Watson reports.
It's had a countdown longer than any other Paralympic Games, 5 years in the making. But finally tonight, the Games began. And Japan offered the technical spectacle you'd expect. The sheer effort to make this event happen has needed every cog to turn. A Games forced to adapt and reimagine itself amid a global public health crisis. It was a circus of colour and athleticism, a giant party with only athletes on the guest list, more than 4,500 of them entering the stadium. 219 of them were British, led by their figurehead, swimmer Ellie Simmons, and the oldest member of the team, archer John Stubbs.
Men carrying the hopes and dreams of a nation on their shoulder.
Sport unifies the world. The flag of Afghanistan was paraded without its team, a nation not forgotten. But outside the stadium was a very different sound. The voices of those against the Games as COVID cases in Japan continue to rise to their highest levels. But the athletes on the inside have lived and trained for this competition for half a decade, desperate to reenact past glory. Britain's Kadina Cox won gold in Rio in both athletics and cycling. She's raring to go again.
I want to do the double-double, and then I'll probably be like, I want to do the triple-double, and it'll just keep going. I'm here. We'll see what happens.
Their excitement is palpable, and Japan put on a welcome worthy of it in the most challenging of times. The next 2 weeks promise glory and despair, and every human emotion in between. Lucy Watson, ITV News.
First it was Nando's without the chicken, now McDonald's without the milkshake. The growing crisis in the haulage sector caused by a lack of drivers is slowly but surely impacting the food and drink we buy in our shops and restaurants. McDonald's says it has no milkshakes in any of its 1,200 British outlets. Sangeeta Lau is at the branch in North London now. So, Sangeeta, what's the company been saying about the shortage?
Well, Chris, they're saying that a small number of items aren't available because of an issue in its supply chain. So at the moment, as you say, you can't buy any milkshakes or other bottled soft drinks because there aren't any. Now, McDonald's aren't elaborating on what that issue in its supply chain is, but the Road Haulage Association says it's because of a shortage of lorry drivers. So there aren't enough drivers to bring the goods to more than 1,000 outlets across the country. And this isn't the only time we've heard this recently. Just last week, Nando's had to close many of its outlets because they ran out of chicken because of a lack of drivers. KFC have also been impacted, having to not offer some of its full menu because they weren't able to fully restock. And also the dairy giant Arla has been unable to make some of its milk deliveries to superstores because, again, they said it was a lack of drivers. So why is this happening? Well, the Road Haulage Association says it's mainly because of two things: Brexit and also the pandemic. After Brexit, thousands of Eastern European drivers left the UK, and because of Brexit, the coronavirus pandemic, 40,000 HGV driving tests have had to be cancelled. So now the British Retail Consortium is calling on the UK government to try and do more and essentially fund more HGV driving tests to make sure this gap in recruitment drive for lorry drivers doesn't get any bigger.
Sangeeta, outside of McDonald's, thank you very much. Finally, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to entertain Tom Cruise when he's taking a break from filming. Well, that was certainly Birmingham's mission after the Hollywood actor was spotted filming there. He's landed his helicopter in a family's field, as you do, and sampled chicken tikka masala, not once, but twice in one of the city's restaurants. And as Amani Ibrahimi reports, Birmingham is the location for one of the scenes of the latest Mission Impossible film.
His Hollywood blockbusters and extreme stunts have taken him all over the world. And now Birmingham is hosting Tom Cruise and the crew of the latest Mission Impossible. But when it was time to take a break, the Hollywood star decided to sample one of Birmingham's most famous cuisine.
We only found out a few hours before when he was coming, and we were told that it would be a very important person that would be coming on the day. And we found out it was Tom Cruise, and none of us could believe it.
The other thing staff couldn't believe was how much Tom enjoyed the chicken tikka masala. In fact, he loved it so much, he went back for seconds.
As soon as we gave him the menu, he looked at chicken tikka masala. That stood out for him, and he asked what it's like, and we explained it to him. But he was the one who ordered chicken tikka masala, and that finished, and he said, "Can I have it again?"
He's been shooting scenes in the Grand Central Station, which has been transformed to look like an Abu Dhabi airport. Mission Impossible 7, which has nothing to do with Corrie, comes out next year. Some parts of it have already been filmed in Derbyshire. It's not known where Tom Cruise will be spotted next, but it looks like the restaurant made such a good impression he might be back for a third masala soon. Amani Ibrahimi, ITV News.
And that's it. My mission is to be back here with the ITV Evening News at 6:30, and I've chosen to accept. The latest weather follows next, and it's a good one for a change from everyone here, though. Bye-bye.